Thank you for listening. This is the Legends Podcast by All Day Vinyl, and I'm your host, Scott Dudelson. After you finish this episode, please subscribe, rate, and check us out on Instagram and YouTube at All Day Vinyl. Today, I'm excited to speak with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee and country rock pioneer. As a founding member of the Eagles, my guest was a key contributor to some of the most popular songs in music history, and as a member of the Flying Burrito Brothers and Dillard Clark, he was an integral part in laying the groundwork of what was to become country rock. My guest is set to release a new album titled Too Late to Be Cool, which is first in over 20 years and produced by the legendary Glyn Johns, who produced the first two iconic Eagles albums. Excited to speak to him today about this new music and his role shaping the history of country rock. Please welcome my guest, Bernie Leadon.
Hey there, Scott.
Hey, Bernie. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Congrats on the new release, Too Late to Be Cool. It's over 20 years since the last record. How long have you been working on the new record, and what was the impetus to finally get it released?
How I usually explain it is I went back out with the Eagles from 2013 through the touring season of 2015. So 25 months of touring, 175 shows around the world, really. And it got my juices flowing, and I was having a good time and enjoying playing that much and getting my chops pretty sharp. And so I have always owned a lot of recording gear, but I didn't have a proper place to put it. It was actually in my living room at a farmhouse I had. And so one of the things I wanted to do is build a building to put all the gear in. And I started late 2015, 16 into 17 planning it. And we started, I guess, building it in 2017. And it took 4 years to build it, and then we had to tweak it. And but all that time, I decided, gee, if I'm building a studio, I'm probably going to have something to record. So maybe I should write more songs, or try to. And I will say I was a lazy songwriter. I only wrote a couple, 3 songs a year that I focused on that I thought were good enough to record, and so that was kind of my pace through most of my career, and that's not really a fast enough pace to do a solo album. And so I started writing much more conscientiously, and even would get out of bed in the night if I thought of something, and I woke up and I had an idea in my head. I would get up, and eventually I put a piece of paper, a pad and a pen by my bed so I could scribble an idea. And I started having experiences I've heard about with songwriters. Like I woke up with a chorus in my head, and I go, oh, I gotta write this down. And I successfully did, and then put the music to it in the morning, and then the rest kind of wrote itself. I went, wow, this is kind of a watershed moment for me. And so songwriting's gotten easier. And we hear all writers, perhaps you feel this way, say that if they write regularly and are disciplined about it, that serendipity or the muse shows up.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to write for half an hour, maybe longer, and then something comes through or something, And also I'll share another thing that I was talking with Mike Campbell about, the guitar player from Heartbreakers, and he said that Dylan had told them, when you're just scribbling as fast as you can write, and it's just kind of coming through in chunks, kind of stream of consciousness. Do not stop it. Let it keep going as long as it will still come. Because if you get 17 verses instead of 5, you never know which is going to be the first verse or which is going to be the chorus. And something later in that stream may be like, whoa, that's cool. And then you you rethink the whole thing around that. So you just have to write. And so I tend to do it in the morning with guitar and coffee, and just kind of noodle on the guitar, and usually can write something. So I had a lot of songs when Glyn said, hey, let's see what you got. And so I had about 100 songs, and gave him about 30. And then we picked ultimately about 15, and 11 made the record, So
Wow. You have the makings of many more records if you so choose.
Yeah, hopefully, and I'm still writing a lot. But you started out talking about country rock, and there's really nothing that's exactly country rock per se. There's definitely rootsy, folkier melodies. The song Coast Highway is basically a blues, but an acoustic blues. And and there's different flavors, on the record. And
Yeah, yeah. I like just a little pissed
yeah,
off. Yeah,
that's
cutting
very
edge
kind
to
of
it.
Stonesy, very Keith
Yeah,
Richards riff in the beginning, and that
right.
was fun to write because I came up with the idea for the chorus. I'm a little pissed off, and so then the verses are just. I tried to write down all the ways that were not profane, that describe being messed over severely. Fucked over, whatever you want
Yeah,
to say.
yeah, yeah.
And that was really kind of fun. But now I have to remember them the way I assembled them, and it's not a story exactly. So it's been fun to try to memorize it, which I believe I have now.
Yeah, you,
Cha-ching.
yeah. Well, you've been doing some shows, right? You just did Americana
Yeah, not
Fest.
yeah. You came to an acoustic show. There's a show in 2 days at the City Winery in Nashville for Americana Fest, which is going on here. And we didn't know we were Americana, but now apparently everybody is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you
Uh,
you shape a genre. Well, even when I think about some of like the early, and we'll talk about deeper, but even like early Dillard and Clark or Hearts and Flowers, that's put into like a country rock vein. And I listen to Hearts and Flowers, and I hear more. I mean, psychedelic, I guess, is rock, but it's not a lot of
yeah,
like edge or like there's no Stones, which I think is rock. And Dylan Clark has got a more, it's a country record. It's got
yeah, and also both of those were acoustic bands.
right.
And actually, Dillard and Clark, we didn't even use a drummer, I don't think, at all. Um, and we used upright bass, so it was very acoustic. That was a kind of a bluegrass folk country record, Dillard and Clark. Um, Hearts and Flowers, the guy was enamored with the Bee Gees, so we were doing folk slash Bee Gees harmonies. I don't know what it was exactly. It was cool. It was different at
Was.
the time.
But let me
Yeah.
ask you a few more questions on the new record. So there's a lot of very very cool things on it. First, the songs are great. Second, you reunited with Glyn Johns, who's iconic producer who did some of your early records. I'm guessing you've been in touch with him the last 50 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yes, it is 50 years. Uh, well, he's far beyond that in our relationship with one another. We're very close friends. We're like brothers. We talk frequently, and we do that thing where you don't talk to somebody for 6 months, and then you pick up the phone and call them, and they go, "Oh my God, I had the phone in my hand to call you." So we have that quantum connection, and I've spent many, many weeks staying with him in England. He stayed with me for the making of this record and other times. And so we're very close friends, and it was a joy to get back in there with him. He's so good at what he does.
Yeah, iconic. And another iconic element is the cover photo, which was shot by Henry Diltz.
Yeah.
Did a lot of
45 years ago.
right. So tell me the history of how the cover got rebirthed for this album.
Well, okay, so back in the day, so I had left the Eagles and I had done one album for Asylum with my friend Michael Georgiadis. So that was part of the Eagles deal. Every leaving member had a right to make one record. And so we did that one and toured opening for Linda Ronstadt in 77, I guess. And then I wanted to do another album by myself. And we did the cover. Henry and his art and our art director, Gary Burden, we had the idea and we had to drive around the Hollywood Hills to find a place where the city would look big enough. So we ended up kind of like Beechwood Canyon, Hollywood Hills, looking toward downtown and toward Long Beach, where there was enough lights that you could fill the frame. And so anyway, we did the photo and picked that shot for the cover of an album that never got finished because I didn't have the songs back then. And so, but that's the print he gave me to use for the cover of that album. So it's exactly the same print. It's the one that he gave me. So I've always loved it, and thinking about a cover for this, I I found it and I went, wow, yeah, we need to use that, you know. So it's, you know, and somebody asked me, what does that mean that you used it now? And I go, well, now it kind of looks like I'm representing all the musicians who came to LA, you know, who were following the Pied Piper out to LA to do music. And so now it kind of just is emblematic of everybody, you know, to me.
Absolutely. Well, let's journey through the past, your path towards LA and how that evolved. And I
Okay.
find it fascinating that in your early days in Gainesville, you grew up, or at least had some musical connection with Don Felder, Stephen Stills. Is that correct?
Well, Felder had contact with Stephen Stills, but Stills had left town right before I got there in, say, August of '64. We had moved from San Diego. I actually spent most of my teenage years in San Diego and knew Chris Hillman, who later was the Birds bass player and one of the partners in the Burrito Brothers. So I had known him in San Diego, and then my family was moving when I was just turning 17. And I wanted to stay in San Diego, but I went with them, as I should have done. And we ended up in Gainesville, Florida, and then it was a whole different uh, creative soup of young musicians who all wanted to emulate British invasion rock, and you know, and we basically we played University of Florida fraternity parties was the main gig that everybody could get. So if you started a band, you could play for a fraternity party if you could learn enough songs, you know. But there'd be the Allman Brothers in the next house, fraternity house over, you know, and Petty and my little brother Tom, little brother, he's only 5 years younger than me, and Petty was only 3 years younger. But they were they were in junior high when we were in high school, and so they had a band also, and there were maybe 15, 20 bands on campus every football weekend on Friday and Saturday, and you could go to the other houses and listen to everybody else's band. And it was really cool. Great way to learn
Yeah. And you
rock, you know.
were you into rock at that time, or were you getting into, because when you were with Hillman, you were doing the the bluegrass stuff, right?
Yeah, in San Diego, they had a bluegrass band, and two of the guys in the bluegrass band owned a music store called the Blue Guitar, and one of those guys, Larry Murray, by '67. So I moved to Florida in '64. By '67, Larry Murray had moved to LA, and he had a group on Capitol Records that called Hearts and Flowers that um, were about to make their second album with a famous A&R producer guy named Nick Venet, who had signed the Beach Boys. And he wrote me a letter and said, "Hey, would you want to come out and join us on Capitol Records to make our second record?" I went, "Yes, I'll be right there." So I got out there in August of '67, and the next week we went into Capitol Records, the tower that looks like a stack of 45s, and met Nick and talked about doing the record. And then because we didn't have a rhythm section, no drummer and bass player, uh, we had an acoustic bass player, jazz guy that helped us do it, and the drummer was, you know, one of the guys from the Wrecking Crew, you know. So and the music, then he started using me on sessions. Nick did, and the band was the rhythm section was always the Wrecking Crew. So there'd be guys, you know, Don Randy, and the bass player was Carol Kay sometimes, and I'm spacing out the drummer's name, but and sometimes
Al Blaine.
yeah, Hal Blaine, and then Earl Palmer also,
Mm-hmm.
who was also a jazz guy. So what a great training, you know. I just got thrown in the deep end, and because I was on that label and doing sessions, I was accepted right away by the local community as one of them, and so it was fantastic. You know?
And so Hearts and Flowers was like you described before, like an early Bee Gees. It's got this psychedelic, but with a very country feel. And this is in '66. Is that approximately right?
Uh, August '67 we started. We probably finished it around the first of the year in '68. Yeah.
So that was around the time, supposing the Buffalo Springfield were doing their thing. They had their country roots. The Byrds were starting to move into, it was before Sweetheart, but Was there a country rock scene or a country scene that you guys all gravitated towards?
Yeah, I think because especially once I left Hearts and Flowers, they didn't get to do a third album basically, and so I fell in with Gene Clark and Doug Dillard. Doug Dillard being a banjo hero of mine, he'd been the banjo player in the Dillards, and Gene Clark had been the main writer and one of the main singers on the Byrds' first album. He wrote "Feel a Whole Lot Better" that Petty later covered. Great writer. So I was sleeping on Doug's couch, and we would be writing banjo instrumentals, and then Gene would come over, and the next day he'd come back with lyrics. So that's how a lot of those songs. We wrote all those songs in about 3 weeks, and Gene was making another album for A&M Records, and he told the producer about our project, and he said, "Let's make that record." So we went in the studio and did the whole thing in a week. So the whole thing was written and recorded in about a week, 6 weeks, and I mean a month or 6 weeks, and then so at that time there was Rick Nelson's Stone Canyon Band was basically country rock. There had already been, I remind folks, that there was Buffalo Springfield, but the Levin Spoonful on the East Coast, Sal
Yeah.
Yanofsky, the guitar player, he played country licks all over the Spoonful
Yeah.
stuff. So it was and that was 65, 66. So, it's something that was coming, I think, just in the air. And then there was Poco, a very polished country rock band. There were others. I'm not thinking of them right now, but and even the Grateful Dead weren't that far away from doing Working Man Dead,
Right. Well,
which was a country rock album, really. And so it was kind of in the air, and the Eagles. I guess we're skipping over the Burritos. So then there were the Burrito Brothers, and they were kind of unique because Gram Parsons was a great writer, and he also was bringing in something that the Eagles brought in prominently later, which is R&B influences. There's a song on the first Burrito album, Gilded Palace of Sin, and I think it's called Hot Burrito Number One.
yeah.
There's Hot Burrito Number One and Number Two. I'm talking about the one that's the classic R&B ballad. An amazing song, right? But so that was being brought in already by the Burritos in 68, 69, 68. So they were making the first Burrito album when we were making the Dillard Clark album, both on A&M Records. So when everybody knew each other and would run into each other all the time, and at the Troubadour Bar. So everybody was cross-pollinating. And Ronstadt was, let's not forget, she was a pioneer of that as well. The Silk Purse album,
Mm-hmm.
produced by Jerry, not Jerry, Chip Douglas from the
Yeah.
Modern Folk Quartet. He was a really good producer. He produced the Monkees, but he did a great album on Linda, and that was kind of country rock too. And so the Burritos and the Dillard Clark, there were all these groups trying to do it. But so then I'll just jump to the Eagles. So we were all driven to succeed. And so we'd all been in bands that had not succeeded for one reason or another, usually often because of a business reason, didn't have one of the elements you have to have. And you have to have a great label, you have to have a great producer, you have to have a great manager, you have to have good songs, whether you write them or somebody else writes them. And around the early Eagles were other songwriters like Jackson Browne, Jack Timpson, J.D. Souther, right? While the Eagle members were starting to learn how to write better, those other guys' songs were around for us to borrow. And so the Eagles had, we were with David Geffen as a manager. We were on Asylum, which was half owned by Atlantic Records, and we got Glyn Johns to produce it. So we had all the elements we needed, and we had songs that could be hits if they were properly promoted, and they were because of all the business things were tended to. So So I kind of think of the Eagles as a batting cleanup, to use a baseball analogy, with country rock. And there were a bunch of other predecessor groups that just didn't succeed for one reason or another. But
So I saw an interview with Chris Hillman. It was you and Chris Hillman. Chris said, I don't know if it was hyperbole or not, and you can tell me if it was, that JD and Glenn would go watch Burrito Brothers shows to get influenced by the music, but also learn what not to do in live performance or how they run their career. Is that hyperbole, or is this from your
no,
experience? Did they go to actually Burrito Brothers shows or see Dillard Clark and get influenced by some of the stuff you were doing before
yeah,
you?
everybody watched everybody. I mentioned the Troubadour before, but so there was Monday night, there was an open mic thing that was called Hoot Night, like Hoot Nanny, but it was an open mic night. And that guy Larry from the Squirrel Barkers that brought me to LA, he was the MC for that on Monday nights at the Troubadour. So it was up to him to who to put on. So, but anyway, he put the Burrito Brothers on, and they wore their suits, their nudie suits.
Yeah.
They looked fantastic, but they had forgotten to rehearse. They were a train wreck. I mean, it just was horrible, frankly. And Chris will admit that. And so all of us went, okay, yeah, check, look good, check, rehearse. It was crazy. So in fact, the Eagles, we developed a concept called lowest common denominator of rehearsal state, readiness. So our goal was to be so rehearsed that if two guys had the flu and the other two weren't talking to each other, we could do a great show. And so I don't think the Eagles ever did a bad show. That matters. It
Yeah,
does.
absolutely. Well, I want to go back and dig in deeper on Dillard Clark and the Burrito Brothers. So this, you
Good.
mentioned, this first album, which I have somewhere right over here, this amazing album right here. So I want to
Yeah.
dig in. So you were living on Doug Dillard's couch. You said playing banjo. Were you
Yeah.
guys, before Gene came along? Were you guys writing songs, or were you just jamming? What was the vibe going on?
Yeah, we were jamming. So, bluegrass there's kind of a standard songbook for bluegrass players, right? There's a couple of hundred songs, 100 anyway, that everybody learns, and 50 banjo instrumentals everybody learns. And so Doug and I both knew those. I was kind of his banjo student in a way. He was kind of my banjo mentor. So we would sit around, I'd play guitar for him, and then we'd swap, and I'd play banjo and he'd play guitar. And then Gene Clark started coming over, and a bass player, David Jackson, started coming over, and Don Beck played mandolin, and we would all start singing classic songs, like Amazing Grace or whatever, Circle Be Unbroken songs. And then we were playing these instrumentals that Gene, and then I was helping him write those, like, hey, why don't we do this section? And then Gene started coming back with full set of lyrics the next day. So that's what he was such a gifted writer. He would do that. We would have, a chord pattern and some kind of melody that we developed instrumentally, and he'd come back with a set of lyrics the next day, almost every day, when we started all hanging out. That's what I mean. We wrote all that stuff in about 3 weeks and recorded it all in 1 week. So no drummer, no percussion except the mandolin. And in bluegrass, the mandolin chop.
Right.
There's a backbeat everybody does when they're not playing lead, and so we did it that way. But so that's how we wrote, and how we wrote fast.
What was Gene like as a person? And you've talked about the brilliance of his songwriting, but as a creative and obviously a tortured soul, what was he like?
Gene was out of the birds already, unfortunately, and I guess that happened because he didn't want to fly. He had flown, and he wrote 8 Miles High about flying to Europe, I think. But he got to where he didn't want to fly, wouldn't fly, and that's why he had to leave the band and the Birds. And then he was kind of drifting around, a little bit aimless, living very nearby where Doug was, in where I was living in Beechwood Canyon. which is right below the Hollywood sign, that canyon. And so Gene was hard to read. He liked martinis. But
Good.
in the daytime he was great. And he was a good harmonica player and this instinctive songwriter. He was very instinctive, not so trained about music. And he was from Missouri, and so was Doug. So they bonded on that. And I mean, at that point he was very functional uh, and really into it. I think he really liked, because of his Missouri roots. He really liked the acoustic thing, and and we were all pretty good players. So this was, well, I mean, like I said, we wrote the stuff and went straight in the studio. So that album
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the documentation of that. We were all good players. And here's a funny thing, because he would have me play banjo, Doug would. So on that album, I actually played banjo on about 5 of those songs, and Doug only played on 2.
Amazing, amazing. And you did one show, right, at the Troubadour?
No, there were more than one show, but yeah, there was one particular one.
Notable one.
Notable, yeah.
Yeah, tell
I
me,
don't know what happened. Um,
can I tell you what I read happened, and you can tell me if it triggers any memory?
oh no, I have memories. Yeah, go.
Okay.
You tell me.
Okay. What I read, it was from David Jackson in an interview. He said prior to the show, Gene and Doug got drunk at Dan Tana's, possibly tripping on acid. During the show, Doug broke his violin, maybe jumped on his violin,
Hmm.
and Don Beck, was he the steel
Mandolin player.
mandolin player? He left the show mid-show.
Yeah,
Any of this truth to your memory?
yeah. That sounds right. So the other thing is that the band had gone electric in the interim, because I guess we had been listening to Merle Haggard classic album, the one with "Sing Me Back Home" and "Mama Tried" and all that stuff on it.
Yeah.
The one with him hanging off a boxcar on the railroad. And we were listening to that, and of course the guitar players on that were fantastic. James Burton was one of them.
Yeah.
And so I guess so we collectively decided we would go electric, which basically meant I changed to a Telecaster, and I'd played electric guitar in my top 40 band in Gainesville, so I was cool with that. And we got a drummer who had also played with the Byrds briefly in the early Burritos, John Cornell. And David Jackson, who was playing upright bass with us, switched to electric bass, which he was very good at already. So, and then Don Beck was maybe still playing mandolin. And so we're on sort of 6 pieces then on the Troubadour stage, and something happened between Gene Clark and Doug Dillard. I don't know what, but they kind of just stopped. They just stopped doing what they were doing, and they were the front people. And then there was just a silence and uh, paralysis. And then Doug threw his fiddle on the ground, and then he stomped his fiddle and broke it. And then they kind of looked at each other and just went, "I think we should leave," and they just walked off stage. And then I think Don Beck thought that was just so off the wall and outrageous and not acceptable that he quit on the spot and walked off the stage. So the other 3 of us, which was the bass player, me, and the drummer, are standing there like, "Holy shit," and there's the audience. Everybody's just like in shock, right? So I said to myself, we are going to exit with style. We were not going to creep off the stage in disgrace. So I said to them, "Buckaroo," which was the Buck Owens' signature theme song. Da 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 da. So I had the telly, and I just kicked it off, and they fell in, and we did about 2 rounds of the A and B section, finished cleanly. I walked up to the mic and said, "Thank you very much." and we walked off like, hey, whatever those guys did, we're not like that. So please, you know what I mean? So I just wanted to be a professional if I could there at that moment. Kind of bizarre.
Yeah, that's classic. Thank you for sharing that. And the Dillard Clark did a second album, which there's a credit that you're on it. Did you play on a lot of that record, or no?
No, me and Hillman, I was already in the Burritos by then, and Hillman and I were invited together to go guest on that second Dillard Clark album. So maybe a couple songs. There's maybe Kansas City Southern, that song. I'm not sure what else. Rob, I honestly I can't remember the credit on the album. May tell you.
And so, but at that time you were already in the Burritos. So you left Dillard Clark. How did you end up reconnecting with Chris Hillman and get into the Burrito Brothers?
Both bands were on A&M Records, and A&M Records, especially then, Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss had bought the Charlie Chaplin film studio on La Brea, and they had built recording studios in a couple of the sound stages, but it still was a quadrangle of open space in the middle, surrounded by kind of, like a movie lot, and with a gate in the front. And we used to rehearse in the Charlie Chaplin projection room where he would view films. And so anyway, we were all on the A&M lot a lot, recording or rehearsing, both groups. And so I had reconnected with the Burritos and gone to see him, as I said, at the Troubadour. And so we were aware of one another. He was aware of, Chris Hillman was aware that I was in Dillard Clark. And so we broke up that incident you just mentioned on stage. And so I guess I was making it known I was available, and coincidentally, the bass player on the first Burrito album, Jeff, so he had quit, and he was a fantastic R&B bass player, rock R&B player. But Hillman had played bass in the Byrds, so he went back to bass, and they thought, well, they'd get a guitar player instead of another bass player. So they got a lead guitar player in me and a harmony singer, and Chris went back to bass, and so that's what the Burrito Deluxe lineup was.
Did you get a nudie suit when you joined?
No. That they had their budget. They had spent their budget on nudie suits, and they'd gone on a famous train tour where they booked the train to go around the country. Anyway, they'd spent their advance. And
well,
so
you were on that, right? You were on the train tour.
No,
you weren't. Is that the Festival Express, or is that something different?
That was different. That was the Burrito Brothers train tour.
Oh wow!
In 69, 68 probably. So anyway, where were we?
Oh, so you didn't get a nudie suit, but you did. You were lucky enough. I'm going to show it right here. I think, or I hope, to get record out a radiation suit. Right over there.
For the Burrito Deluxe thing, Gram, on his limited budget, got these plastic suits and the gloves. What is he trying to say? I don't know. We still don't know.
Yeah, when you got there and he gave this to you, is it just kind of like,
put this on,
put it on and do it?
Yeah, it was probably a food worker suit, actually.
It's such a bizarre cover. The burrito and the radiation. I love it.
I got to tell you about the burrito. Survived quite a long time. So Gram Parsons moved into the Chateau Marmont on the 4th floor, and there was a balcony off the back of the living room, and he put that burrito out there on a paper plate, and it remained out there for months and months and months until the whole thing turned green, but it still had the sequins on it.
And that's this?
That's that burrito, yeah.
Classic. Is this early burrito, or is this after months of wear at the Chateau Marmont?
No, that's the original version, yeah.
And so what was the chemistry in the band like between Hillman and Gram Parsons? This is coming after Gilded Palace of Sin, probably before obviously recording Burrito Deluxe.
Yeah, so at some point in there, the Stones came through LA and stayed and did a residency. And Gram was very enamored of the Stones and Keith Richards and started hanging out with them, staying up all night. And he was not writing songs. And so I didn't arrive into a band that had songs. We wrote some songs together, older guys, and
Mhm.
Chris wrote, I think, wrote Cody, but it was not a song rich environment right then. And and uh and Gram was hanging out with the Stones. He was more like in the Stones than he was in the Burritos at that point. And that just got worse and worse until we were in some venue that we were going to play in the Valley in the afternoon to do a sound check / rehearsal, and Gram just didn't show. And Hillman just went, that's it. And he fired Gram. And then we did the Festival Express tour, which the film eventually came out, and you can see the Burrito Brothers. I sang Lazy Day, that was a Gram song. And then we were a 4-piece band, with Sneaky Pete and Michael Clark on drums. And actually, viewing that film, that was a pretty good little band. If I'd been a harder worker as a songwriter, and maybe that could have worked. But Chris didn't think it could, so he went and he found Rick Roberts. The story was busking on the street at UCLA, and but Rick had a satchel of songs like Colorado and all that, and so he was invited into the band. But he was more of a soft rock guy.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and so it changed. The whole nature changed a great deal. And then Sneaky quit,
yeah.
and the steel guitar player quit, and we got Al Perkins, and we did the Blue Burrito album. I think Sneaky was still on that maybe, but Sneaky quit first, and then I quit, and I walked in. We came off the road. We'd been in New England, Cape Cod, the Burritos one summer, and I went to the McCabe's guitar shop in Santa Monica and said to the lady that I knew there, yeah, I'm thinking about leaving the Burritos. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And she said, hey, Don and Glenn are putting a band together. Why don't you call them? So I knew they were working with Ronstadt, and I knew Ronstadt's producer, manager, John Boylan. I called John and said, what's going on? He goes, oh, yeah, man, yeah, you'd be great with them. And he paid for a rehearsal hall at SIR, and we spent one afternoon in there and decided to work together. And in the hallway were the Jackson 5 clothes, and they were in the next big room, Jackson 5. So that was it. We started, and Glenn Frey was signed with David Geffen already with J.D. Souther, but Geffen wanted to keep J.D. and not keep Glenn. So Glenn had reached out to Henley about starting a band, and it all happened really, really fast. And then we walked into Geffen's office and said, well, we're a band. Here we are. You want us or not? He listened to one rehearsal and signed us. It's his first band on Asylum Records. So again, that happened really fast. So
Yeah,
interesting.
what I read from Geffen's recollection was that you walked in and you're like, we're here. So,
Yeah.
do you want us? Like you were the guy. And I got to imagine that Glenn and JD had their band, but you were the guy who had obviously Randy was in Poco. You had been laying that foundation that they were building upon for many
Yeah.
years before.
Yeah. I had more cred at that time in the industry in town.
Yeah, and in terms of your songwriting, you brought in Train Leaves Here This Morning into the Eagles. I'm curious with the Burrito Brothers. Well, let me say with Dillard Clark, you mentioned you did a lot of the instrumentals, and then Gene came in and wrote a lot of the lyrics. With the Burrito Brothers and songs like Older Guys, was it the same type of dynamic where you do instrumentals, or were you also getting into lyrics as well?
I'd always been into lyrics, just not with Dillard Clark, because honestly, Gene was too good. Uh, with the Burritos, nobody had any songs. So I brought God's Own Singer, and I had written that already, totally,
Yeah.
lyrics and everything. Yeah, we kind of wrote together, older guys. We kind of wrote in the room and Charlie Chaplin projection room. But yeah, so then I got to the Eagles. I reached back 2 bands and got Train Lisa this morning. And I think I wrote the music to the B section, the chorus, and Gene wrote all the lyrics. So anyway, it was a song that I was a co-writer on that I thought I could sing in the Eagles, and it's a twofer, right?
Yeah.
So I brought it to them. They loved it, and so that worked out.
So in terms of songwriting and in the Eagles, there's a song called My Man, and it's got some lyrics in there that make me think it's about Gram Parsons, got the Hickory Wind reference. Is there truth to that?
Yes, absolutely. So what happened is we had made the first 2 Eagle albums pretty fast because we had the songs, and then the third album, we'd been on the road and we didn't have any songs. We went back to England to try to do a third album with Glyn Johns, and we did 2 songs for sure, including Best of My Life. We did with Glyn for a third album. But Graham was doing some recording solo stuff, and he had me in to do overdubs, like play dobro and whatever, maybe sing something down at Capitol Records in the small studio, like a couple of evenings right before the Eagles flew to England to make the third album. And we said goodbye in the parking lot and all that. And then a few days later, we flew to England. And by the time I got over jet lag, I found out that Graham had passed away. And he was one of the first people I knew intimately that had passed that young. He was only 26, and I was 25, maybe. No, yeah, 24, maybe. So it hit me hard, and the Eagles thing kind of bogged down. Partly, maybe for me, I was just kind of depressed. So I started writing the My Man song, and I didn't finish it there. I finished it in LA. Came back from not finishing that album, and then changed producers to Bill Simzik, and Felder started playing on the records, and we went in the record plant in LA. And during that time, I finished My Man and recorded it for that third album for On the Border. And I heard it's been My Man, the title has been used, or no, God's Own Singer. So it's not My Man. It was another of my songs. It was used on Gramps' gravestone.
Was it really?
God's Own Singer, yeah.
Wow. Where is his gravestone? Is it in like North Carolina, or where is he from? Somewhere out there?
He was from Waycross, Georgia, but I don't know if he was taken back to Winter Park, Florida, where his main family was from. I'm not really clear on that. I mean, famously, Phil Kaufman stole his body from air freight, that whole movie that was made about that. And so after Phil Kaufman set him on fire, and the fire towers saw the fire, and they went and put him out, then his family claimed him and took him back east and did a proper burial.
Insane story.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to wrap up with one last question that ties back to the new record. So you've got a song which has got a music video to it called Too Many Memories, and in that video behind you, there's a lot of images from your career. So I'm curious, you've just shared so many amazing memories, but is there something that you look back? I mean, there's so many things. Is there something, one, that you could look back and be like, holy shit, like what a life. This happened, or this was that, of all those memories? Is there a summation of one that you could point to?
No, not one thing. And as I've said to other questioners about it, and the title is Too Many Memories, and that's actually slightly inaccurate. There's all these memories. The thing is people are often troubled about where they have a regret or something, But I can honestly say at this point, I really don't have regrets, because I've cleaned up a lot of stuff, including with Glenn Frey, which is why I went out for that tour, or was invited to. So, no, that was a fun video to do. And a lot of those photos came out of my own personal photo archive. So yeah, it was a trip to do it and revisit, in talking with you today, I mean, revisiting the bands and, what the dynamics were. And so, but one thing I'll just share, this is kind of cool. So I can play the tape backwards and see that it went, all of those connections went back to this guy, Larry Murray, who was in the bluegrass group in San Diego, who invited me to come join him on Capitol Records in '67. And on Capitol Records was Linda Ronstadt that I played on Stone Pony's record for her producer. And that turned into me being in her band in 1969. While I was at the Burritos also, I was also in Ronstadt's band, the Corvettes. But Ronstadt led directly to the Eagles. So it's been really just a continuum, and one thing led to another, and it is pretty cool. The whole thing is.
Yeah, it is. Well, Bernie, I want to thank you so much for the time today. I want to thank you for all the amazing music, for the vision you had and what you've created. So I appreciate you. And thank you for listening to the Legends Podcast by All Day Vinyl. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate it, share it, subscribe, and follow us and check us out at All Day Vinyl on Instagram and YouTube.